How about we turn this boat around, call a cab for my son, and then you can do whatever you want with me.
Security, take care of Miguel. He'll be extending his stay.
What?
Braga wants someone that would sell the abuelita to be behind the wheel.
The New Republic lies to the galaxy!
We have a spy in our ranks who just sent a message to the Resistance. I sense unease.
I'm opening a new Chaos Theater in Toronto, and the Sex Pops are playing our grand opening tonight, and it would feel really weird for all of us if you weren't there.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
You better get in. We need to talk. You see, we made a deal, Harold, and I assume you don't want me to go back on my part.
Indeed not.
Nebula, go to Xandar and get me the orb.
You, sir, truly are Mr. Incredible.
Bo Peep! Oh, yes, I know Bo.
You do?
Hop on in. We'll take you to her.
Oh, well, you don't have to do that.
Vincent, be careful with our new friends.
Put him back in the timeout chair. Bring in the bookworm.
Where is she? Launch now! Keep him away from the rings.
General Shainu, your report.
From our airships, we will rain fire over their lands. A fire that will destroy everything.
Did you find it?
Huh? Ah, Katie. Yeah, forget the ruby. Ruby's gone. Focused. Cato-centric, boss.
You need to be back in time for the World Cup final.
What do all these scenes have in common together? They are all villain scenes. The bad guys. The ne'er-do-wells. It is generally accepted that a good villain is a complex one. A person with a drive and motivation that is both rational and understandable to both sides of the conflict, aiding both the audience and our hero to think beyond our personal experience, to empathize with our villain's goals and, at best, rethink our worldviews. Generally pretty neat. That is not what this video is about though. I'm not here to preach to the choir about how the villains of these films and many others are great or average or terrible. Rather, I'm here to discuss the way these movies introduce these villains, their goings-on, what we can assume about their day-to-day life, their rise to power, and compare their power to the heroes they battle. We'll either see them working towards gaining their resources or have the existence of their resources explained to us in one way or another, whether subtly or not so subtly. At worst, we have their power just exist out of nowhere inexplicably. But the point in all these cases is the same. The villains in these examples hold power. Now, power is important to realize in these films. The power levels that are generally showcased to us are pretty established and recycled from film to film. This can be seen through the uses that a villain's resources achieve in order to aid them. Generally speaking, we have big army, cool new weapon, valuable intel, fame and or fortune, or leverage over a leading figure, among other things that are more esoteric and rare. This means that when I say power, I'm not talking about strength. I'm talking about resources, leverage, and social status, things that you generally wouldn't be born with or accidentally acquire. And when born with these resources, you need to remember that they need to be maintained and used effectively. That is why I don't like people shitting on rich people like they are dumb and wouldn't be able to live without their riches. Rich people that stay rich are not dumb. At worst, they are average. But dumb people that become rich go all the way back to poor. How many people win the lottery and go bankrupt because of it? Now, the villain will be doing things to achieve whatever they want to achieve using the resources that they have under their belt. What are the resources that the villains have in these movies? Not compared to each other or to the real world, that would be an exercise in futility. Instead, what are the resources that these villains have as compared to the heroes of the story? In all the examples I have shown, they are all much more powerful. They all have resources, the likes that the hero doesn't have. The villain is generally spawned into the story with these resources, and at best we are told how they got there. The examples that we have are Lex Luthor got his finances by tricking an elderly woman into giving him her riches as she is dying. Ernesto de la Cruz got his success through stealing songs and performing them. Braga got his success through hard work, escaping a tough world in Mexico and building a drug empire. although his source of power keeps getting recontextualized after every installment, but let's ignore the sequels, they're really stupid. Hugs made it up the ladder of the new empire using superior training techniques that aided in leading of his troops to increase the strength of the First Order and overthrowing the Republic. Weird that we don't get shown or told any of this in the films. That is also ignoring that he is a spy. Kylo was trained by both Luke Skywalker and Palpatine under the disguise of Supreme Leader Snoke, which gave him the strength to defeat the Knights of Ren. Gideon produces music for upcoming musicians and has pooled excessive resources in order to build another Chaos Theater in Toronto. He also has a bunch of henchmen. Lord Farquaad is a king who, through oppression, runs a seemingly successful and prosperous kingdom for his citizens to enjoy at his discretion. Ronan the Accuser leads a group of heavily religious Kree who believe in the old regime and that its ways should be the status quo. Syndrome built and sold weapons, making him a fortune in order to live out his dreams of being adored as a hero and in order to eventually trivialize the powers that come with being a hero in this society. Gabby runs the antique store's toys as a matriarch. Lotso runs the Sunnyside Daycare and a group of toys there as a patriarch. Kang has power over the quantum realm and a kingdom of his own there.
And you think you can beat me? I am Kang!
Fire Lord Ozai has the power of the Fire Nation, who has so far been in a 100-year war, overtaking a massive chunk of the Avatar world and continues to do so with strength and strategy. The Toad runs the sewers from behind the scenes with the Rat Enforcers.
And so on and so forth.
All these villains are powerful, very powerful, but not necessarily in their physical strength. Lex couldn't take on Superman head-to-head in a fair fight, no such thing is possible. Neither would Lord Farquaad take on Shrek. Nor could Syndrome take on Mr. Incredible in a fair fight. So what makes them good adversaries? Simply their positions in the kingdoms that they have built for themselves. In these scenarios and in every film I have shown, the heroes are made the underdogs by their positions in the world that the film builds regardless of their own abilities and what they have access to. No matter their circumstances, the heroes are from the outset underdogs. Superman is just a financially struggling reporter to the people around him. Miguel and Hector have no power in the world and are pushed aside by authority figures where Ernesto would be given special treatment. Brian and Toretto are both ignored by the FBI's authority figures and both have to rely on their own wits to win the day. Ray and Finn both are nobodies that bumble their way into a larger conflict. The resistance in this film themselves are underdogs, even though it makes no sense for them to be that way. Scott Pilgrim is alone in his fight against 7 Evil Exes, that is excluding the horny weirdo and at the end where Knives joins the fight. Gideon also happens to have a group of guards around him. Shrek spends the whole movie a pariah, hated by everyone, where people regularly try to kill him just for existing. Shrek is somehow capable of making it into the castle party without further resistance, but it is very safe to assume that the might of the kingdom would have ground him into paste. This is just the film letting him go so that we can have a payoff. The Guardians all are a bunch of misfits that save the day after being aided by a bunch of soldiers in different armies, one of which is genocided very efficiently.
Dance off, bro! Me versus you! It's on!
Mr. Incredible starts off alone facing against a whole island of high-tech armed soldiers, and still loses after joining with the whole family. Woody is retarded in this film. That feels so good. Woody is incapable to get everyone to work together to leave, which even if they tried, Lotso and his toys would have not allowed them to. Ant-Man and his bitch daughter and his bitch wife and his bitch mother-in-law and his retarded father-in-law are all alone and join up with the resistance to fight the power of Kang. Aang and his army at its largest still wouldn't have been enough if not for using tactics that took them into the Fire Lord's island. Rita and Roddy are literally alone in their fight against the Toad and his henchrats. Now that is not to say that it is regulation that our villains are rulers and monarchs and our heroes are underdogs in the world around them in popular movies. What about King Leonidas? He's a king, for crying out loud. He has a whole army under his rule, ready to follow its every command. but it is quite clear that the Persians are much stronger. I mean, they win at the end, so not a great example. Let's try another. What about Titan? He's a perfect example of a villain who is much weaker than the protagonist. Just an incel with intense psychopathic tendencies.
And I'd be watching you like a dingo watches a human baby.
Megamind, on the other hand, has a whole army of robots and a minion. Although he does get godlike powers and is capable of beating the hero with ease and has to be defeated with brain instead of brawn. Okay, let's look for a better example. Joker from The Dark Knight, a single man who's capable of taking on a multi-billionaire with his intellect and general disregard for his own safety. Although he does have the backing of the criminal underbelly of Gotham, and Batman has made the underdog by having no one else to rely on other than Lucius Fox, who disagrees with his method toward the end and can't aid him directly. That is also ignoring that Joker basically takes over the criminal underworld and runs the whole group of criminals. Okay, we can do better. Let's get another example. How about Killmonger? He is a man that grew up in a crime-ridden part of town, with nothing to his name but his skills and genocidal hatred towards white people. Sorry, colonizers.
We're gonna send vibranium weapons out to our war dogs. They'll arm oppressed people all over the world, so they can finally rise up and kill those in power, and their children.
It's time they know the truth about us.
Sorry, Eric.
It's gonna be okay.
When he first arrived, he was nothing but a forgotten prince with no power other than a blood right that his cousin T'Challa, the hero of the film, shared. On top of that, T'Challa was the king. But Killmonger still becomes the king himself, and our hero becomes the underdog in this film and has to fight on equal footing with the villain before winning. So not a great example either. Helmut Zemo, a single man who, through his intellect and abilities as a special ops soldier, was able to poison the Avengers from the inside. Truly an underdog, but that is of course ignoring that the Avengers that are after him have all disbanded and are currently fugitives of the law, so that means that they are still underdogs themselves. I mean, Zemo didn't have the power of the United Nations and the whole Avengers against him, only until he is jailed. Okay, not a perfect example, but close enough. What about Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs? An amazing movie with a very strong and capable female protagonist.
Crafting a character like Ripley from Alien or Sarah Connor from the Terminator movie.
It's always Ripley and Sarah Connor, like every single time.
What you're doing, Miss Starling, is coming into my hospital to conduct an interview and refusing to share information with me.
This is the number for the U.S. Attorney's Office. Please, I think you discuss this with him, or you let me do my job. You understand?
Hannibal in this film was jailed. His power, if it can be even called that, comes from his intellect, where anyone who tries to talk to him will be holding none of the cards, whereas he holds all of them. Clarice Starling, on the other hand, has a backing of the FBI and resources to get almost anything she wants. Truly, the only reason Hannibal makes it out is because he is capable and intelligent. But that being said, who is the villain our hero faces against exactly? Not Hannibal, he's left alone to his devices by our main hero. Rather, it's Buffalo Bill, or James Gumb. Now, James is in no way a powerful antagonist in any sense, but neither is she at that point. He is holding most of the cards, and he wastes time messing with her instead of just getting it over with and killing her in the dark. She is the underdog in this scene, and she succeeds not from the power she holds, rather from her skills as a well-trained FBI agent. What is going on here? Now, before I make my next point, I need to preface this point with this. I have not seen every movie, ever. Honestly, I'd say I've seen less movies than the average person watching this video right now. You probably have better examples, and I would love to hear what you have to say on my next point. So please do inform me of any villains that I might have missed, regardless of the medium. That being said, I am tackling popular media. There must be a slew of indie films and stories that have a textbook underdog villain without any external power, where the heroes of the story are the ones holding all the cards. I believe that the underdog archetype is essential to making an uncontroversial and generally liked film. There are lots of reasons why that could be, so let's go through the obvious ones. Making an engaging and satisfying journey where the heroes defy great odds to win and succeed despite the reality of the situation. Distilling this mentality down to the very basic example, it is David beating Goliath. People generally enjoy seeing a hero start from the bottom and work their way up the ladder until they reach the top. This is due to the fact that life itself goes that way. We're all underdogs at the start of our journey, not just relating to how we are born useless and crying. At some point in our life, we're left to our own devices where each and every one of us is expected to make a splash in our chosen path. Whether we are rich or poor, capable or incapable, regardless of where or when we were born. People also generally enjoy hearing success stories. That is why biographies and inspirational speakers are a thing. Of course, excluding the fact that biographies serve more than just inspiring us through a person's life. When people do not enjoy these stories that speak of struggle and pain, which result in success and rewards, it's generally because of jealousy, coveting whatever they can have. Both jealousy and inspiration are equivalent in this case. People see someone else do well and put themselves in the hero's shoes, all the while hoping to be able to stand by them down the line. Why do you think house tours get millions of views? We also see this in our psychology outside of storytelling. One of the main reasons why a lot of people still buy lottery tickets is because of past winners. It is safe to assume that as soon as a person wins the lottery, people will find winning to be more possible, thus leading to higher lottery ticket sales. This is what we call availability heuristics. The availability heuristic is a phenomenon that occurs when we make a decision on the likelihood of something happening based on the recalling prior events that show the same result, regardless of reason or objective metrics to the contrary. That is also generally why people enjoy having the hero win at the end of the story. If a plucky underdog at the base of their potential can work towards a better them, why can't we? What is stopping us to do the same, to become the best we can ever be? That is another reason why inspirational quotes are so abundant, why inspirational speeches are sought after.
I understand that quite a few of you out there are dealing with a pornography addiction. There are many resources available to help you overcome your addiction, such as support groups, therapy, and online communities. I'll make sure to link some of those in the video description so you can look at them later.
I never said thank you, and you'll never have to.
We crave success stories because we crave success. Underdog success stories make us happy for their result. There is a definite craving for stories where villains win the day, but that isn't caused by the enjoyment of seeing lamentable and cruel characters succeeding, generally speaking. Rather, it's a counterculture based on the overabundance of the opposite. This is quite the established phenomenon. Generally, seeing the same thing over and over again will create a desire for the opposite regardless of what is in abundance. That is why art forms go from revolution to revival. One clear modern example is an art movement in architecture called less is more, established in the 1920s. This came as a reaction to the old style of architecture, which features many complex sculpted constructions added on top of the base shell of the structure. Ornate windows, embellished doorways, adorned pillars, all these elements were part of architecture for thousands of years in order to showcase a given culture's supremacy in their artistic and intellectual abilities, a symbol of a society's strength and taste. Less is more is about the opposite approach. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe is the architect that pioneered this idea. His ideology can be seen through all of his buildings, reducing what are fundamentally unnecessary parts of a building and keeping what is essentially needed in order to keep a building standing and functional. His philosophy was shared by many people of the time, as a reaction to the First World War and the rejection of the old world's ideologies, since those ideologies were seen as what led this world to ruin. That was not only extended to architecture, but for the sake of the video, I will stick to it. Now, you won't guess what came after the minimalist approach to architecture's success. Yes, dear viewer, a counterculture was born in opposition to the counterculture, called Less is a Bore, in 1963. The ebb and flow of society is quite apparent. Counterculture is a permanent fixture of our culture, to the point where it can't really be called counterculture, it's just culture. That has happened time and time again, in all facets of life, where what we have a lot of irritates whoever sees it every day, and leads people to crave the opposite. That is why stories where the villain wins will be sought after by whoever is engrossed in the world of storytelling from now till the end of time. That being said, I highly doubt we will ever see this counterculture become the status quo when it comes to storytelling. The simple fact is, a hero who is filled with goodness and virtue will always be more appreciable than a villain who is evil and malevolent. At best, you can get villains that are only slightly wrong or have been wronged and need saving. Those people are generally shown the light or saved, and they move their convictions towards the correct path. Those are common in children's stories, but more adult stories that reflect that are Superman 2 with Dr. Octavius and A Christmas Carol with Ebenezer Scrooge. Although the former was just a normal guy who had to be saved from not very nice AI, and the latter was the main character, although still a villain. On top of that, as much as we might crave a story that gives a villain the win, we would hate to have that happen in our day-to-day life. Some people stand by bad people, but that is because those people see the bad person as a good person. A great example of this is Ted Bundy. That asshole of a piece of shit has so many supporters it's worrying, but his supporters are mostly middle-aged women who find him attractive and either think they could have fixed him or fetishize being one of his victims. That being said, generally speaking, we don't want to see an all-powerful villain take over a country and destroy its population. If you want to create a long enough story to make it into a feature-length film, you need to fill time. A lot of that time can be filled with character and world development, but action is also a staple of all the films I've mentioned, whether the action be intense or family friendly. Simply speaking, it is a lot easier to give a hero obstacles to overcome in the form of resources that the villain has access to through their cumulative assets they've collected in their pursuit of power. If your villain is incapable of putting up resistance to the hero, what will extend the length of a story beyond a 5-minute scene where the hero quickly dismantles the villain's plans? On the other hand, what stops the villain from quickly winning the day when the hero is incapable of growth through learning from tough experiences that are posed by the villain's resources? That is what gives our heroes' victories meanings. One Punch Man never learns how to be a better fighter, how to overcome adversity. His victories mean nothing to him and to the audience. We expect him to win every time. We are never excited at his victories because there is no lesson in him being unbeatable. That being said, One Punch Man makes sure to show us the hero's journey through different pairs of eyes. People that fail and learn that they have limits, and to push beyond those limits next time. To never give up in the face of adversity just because you can't succeed. Saitama is not an inspiration to the real world because we don't see him improve the way we wish to. And since he never needs to improve, he remains stagnant in a world that is ever evolving with dangers and threats of ever increasing magnitude. Beyond that, the more cynical side of me sees what nameless, faceless goons aid in storytelling. They not only give us pretty colors to look at and admire, they also fill dead airtime until the third act, where the main villain or villains are faced by our now fully evolved hero who is ready to take on what was once an insurmountable challenge. Now, with all that in mind, how does the archetype of the underdog affect the way our villains are shown to be? Quite simply, our villains are consistently shown to be powerful, rich, successful leaders that have, through their own abilities, earned their position, even when they earn their place in this world unethically. Lex Luthor, for example, in Superman Returns, has earned his financial supremacy by lying and tricking a dying woman, but he did still achieve that through his own intelligence and resourcefulness. Lord Farquaad most definitely was born a rich monarch, but still has to, I assume, lead a kingdom for all the years he had been king, and Dulag does look pretty neat and functional, with the caveat that the people there were controlled by card holders to react right. Emperor Palpatine used his intelligence to trick the whole Senate into giving him the ultimate power over the galaxy to preserve strength and stability over the Separatists. And it keeps going. Syndrome used his intelligence to build weapons and become rich. The Toad used his strength to put rats in line under his employed. De La Cruz used his musician skills to perform music that everyone enjoyed, and so on and so forth. Quite simply, a formidable hero gets challenged by a formidable villain, but their power is quite differently showcased. A villain is quite often a leader of men, the head of the snake. An individual with power over many and the skills needed to run the organization. Why is that? I know that seems like a weird question to ask, but why do villains quite often take on the form of a dictator? I'd argue that it is quite natural for villains to fall into that category based on what they often would need in the real world to dominate the way they want, but it's become prescriptive with the amount of villains that we see in our films. That being said, historic evidence gives us the contrary viewpoint. Historically speaking, there have been revolutions against kings and queens alike, like the Peasants' Revolt in 1381 due to the increase of tax, or the rise to power of King Cabbage, aka Ivailo. Sources say that he personally killed Tsar Constantine after being attacked for being too good at his job as a peasant and leader of a peasant army protecting his own country of Bulgaria from the Mongols. On the whole though, kings, queens, emperors, tsars, and pharaohs were all seen as ordained by gods, given power they rightfully deserve for their higher status due to their royal blood. Hell, in some cases they were considered gods themselves. And when a god says or does something to a believer, it's not just ethical, it will be blasphemy to question their decision. We see that today. The law punishes criminals with all the might a country can output as long as it's under certain ethical boundaries. As disgusting and deplorable some of these criminals can be, it's quite clear that they are the underdogs in these scenarios. Their power is relegated to what they can do with their resources, and if you have more resources than the state, you are the state. Generally, we like to see criminals get their comeuppance regardless of their power level, but that is usually not the case in these stories. Why? I will argue a point that might seem quite facetious. We will very rarely see the good guys be strong leaders with a lot of more resources than the villains ever, because if we did, our heroes might look a little bit like these guys. I know, quite the leap, isn't it? Well, let me explain. When the hero of a film is shown to be able to crush opposition with his thumb like they are bugs, you better make the villain quite deserving of their fate. This is where One Punch Man comes back into play. We don't feel bad for them because they are monsters. They revel in the fear and the suffering that they create in their opponents, regardless of their strength and abilities. No target is too weak, no goal too cruel. I will crush you where you stand because I feel like it, and I will never stop. It is quite clear to us that monsters in this universe are nothing but evil and filled with hate. Season 2 shows us this quite clearly, where humans that eat the monster cells become violent and hate-filled creatures, where they once were just an average human being without any murderous intent. When the good guys are more powerful and capable than the villain, you could very easily end up rooting for the bad guy, sometimes even like them. Great examples of this are Light Yagami from Death Note and Arthur Fleck from Joker. But even though the audience generally roots for them, they do for different reasons. And I would argue that they are the two extremes of villains that are rooted for. For Light Yagami, you generally root for him because of his amazing intellect and his fascinating understanding of his murder weapon that has never been seen before, as told to us by Ryuk. The reason more people root for Light over L is because we are introduced to Light first and have more of an intimate insight into his mind compared to L, up until Light loses his memory, after which L pretty much becomes the only one we have insight into. On top of that, the good guys that get really close to discovering Light are killed in tension-filled scenes, where the audience generally roots for Light, because even though they are all just humans without the power to kill using immaculate plumage, in these moments, both Light and the hero are in equal danger. On the other hand, we root for Arthur Fleck because his condition is so unfavorable that you can't blame him for a lot of what he does. He doesn't kill for no reason either. He specifically kills people that betray him, beat him, and treat him like trash. Both of these characters are villains, and portrayed as such, but we always end up rooting for their well-being. Not necessarily their goals though. A good example of this being done poorly is The House That Jack Built, the uncut version, filled with the murder of helpless children and women alike. In that film, no one roots for Jack because even though he is an underdog, as shown by the ending of the film, he is still more powerful than his victims. This makes it seem like the reason a villain would ever be rooted for is if the villain is resisting a force for good that is more powerful than him, compared to a villain that does the same if not more damage to more powerful entities that are peacekeepers. And yes, I know that Jack is not supposed to be a good guy, but neither were Light and Arthur, so it's important to note why we empathize with one and not the other. So with that in mind, I think it should be clear why we don't generally get all-powerful heroes and weak villains. Imagine if Kylo and Hux both were alone in their endeavor to bring back the Empire and Princess Leia ordered their death with a bombing run. Then their death would not be seen as a victory, rather as punching down, and we generally don't enjoy punching down, even when the people we are punching have genuinely terrible goals, like bringing back a murderous regime. Imagine if Lord Farquaad was just running around screaming at fairy tale creatures and wishing their death, after which Shrek snaps him in half and keeps walking. Imagine if Mr. Incredible came across adult Syndrome working in the same company and Syndrome tries to kill him, after which Mr. Incredible tosses him through several walls. And it keeps going on, to the point where our villains go from formidable to this guy.
Soon thou shalt be naught but dust, twisting and writhing in the dead of space!
A lot more distasteful to kill a villain without any resources. Why is that? How does not having millions of dollars and an army make your death more upsetting than satisfying? I think it has to do with the potential for evil. Unless you live on Tumblr, we don't care about what you think. We don't even care about what you threaten to do. We care about what you can do and what you have done. That is why, if Stephen Hawking was a pedophile, it's seen as more of a joke than a genuine threat. Who is he gonna hold down and rape? It's also why the killing of Hitler as a baby thought experiment is so difficult to a lot of people.
Hi, this is a toughie. That's why you're such a little bastard. No one's ever changed you.
Except for Jeb.
If you could go back in time and kill baby Hitler, would you? I need to know.
And?
Hell yeah, I would.
You're technically killing an innocent life, but I think that killing Hitler as he is living in his apartment thinking about the Jewish question after his parents died and he just finished a day of painting postcards for shekels, or even when he had been incarcerated for his political crimes, would have the same effect. Why does this happen to us? Why are we so ready to tolerate great evil among us when it can't enact it? This is so clearly reflected in our stories that we as a society have to agree that we don't hate people who think horrible things, rather we hate people who do horrible things. That is quite clear. Actions speak louder than words, don't they? But it is not the same in movies. As there is a layer of separation in our films, we can look at a person killing a few people, and as long as he is weak and poor enough, we would feel bad instead of feeling anger and calling for his incarceration, or worse. Again, not the same in real life. Here we hate murderers. But on the big screen, what is a few kills if your opposition is one decision away from eradicating you? Now you might think that the reason we support villains in their own stories is because they are the main character, and that in the case of Joker, we feel bad for him because he struggled all the way throughout the story until the end. But that is ignoring that all the other villains I've showed have their own stories. We just not shown them usually. What we see is a successful bad guy with resources that far outweigh the ones our hero have. But what we don't see is the everyday struggles that a person like them had to go through to get to that point. For example, if we were to see Syndrome working on his experiments, getting frustrated as things don't work, competing with other weapons manufacturers, and overworking himself, leading to bad health and little to no sleep, as it all pays off at the end and becomes a well-rounded inventor, would probably feel good for his success. Hell, we might even put ourselves in his shoes and get inspired to work on something we have always wanted to do. Because since he was able to achieve something extremely difficult, we would hope to do the same in our own life. But we're putting ourselves in the shoes of a man who's more than ready to kill innocents in order to prop up his reputation, and at the end kidnap a baby to raise him as a sidekick. Now you might say that the struggle that Syndrome went through is not part of the story, and therefore us completely hating him is fine, because we're not given much reason to hate to him. But these things happened. In that universe, the villain had to struggle and persevere as our heroes do, and perseverance through struggle is a trait that we all value in all our heroes. There is a very low chance you will ever see a hero hold ultimate power all the way until the end. It's also very likely that you'll never see a hero defeat the villain like crushing an ant. Well, at least a villain who's more human than absolutely evil. A villain who is still capable of being saved from their path of darkness. They might end up looking a bit too much like this guy, which is interesting because realistically, that is what heroes are at the core. Not Jew-hating Nazis, but authoritarians that understand what is best for you, regardless of your choices. When Batman wears the suit, you have no say against who he fights. You have no say how he fights. All you can say is, well, let's hope he does the right thing. He didn't choose to have Batman or Superman or Mr. Incredible. They chose to place their will over the world around them. They know what is best, regardless of your opinions, and they will always do the right thing. What is the right thing? It is up to the hero, and ultimately up to the writer. Rarely, very rarely, would you get a hero who is fundamentally wrong as to why they decide to fight.
Isn't that the mission? Isn't that the why we fight? So we can end the fight? So we get to go home?
Ant-Man tried to do something like that, but they completely misunderstood their character. An amazing example of this in our modern media is Platenteena, an amalgamation of base elements Avatar style.
Water. Earth. Fire. Air.
She's supposed to be the embodiment of goodness, right? Save the earth and all that jazz. A hero to the people, to the world, and to Morty. But what sours her view in all our minds is her methods. In her mind, of her own volition, she believes that Earth's death is on our doorstep. And after Morty frees her from her shackles, she is free to learn about the world, where her kids kept her ill-informed. They knew what she was capable of if she learned of the reality of what was going on in the world. And when she learns, her methods become more and more extreme. The ends justify the means, don't they? Except they don't. Destroying property, killing people, it's all distasteful. But she's doing it for the greater good, isn't she? A great response to her authoritarian will being placed on the world regardless of choice is the coal miners telling her that they don't get to choose how they live, how they make their living, how they keep their kids fed and sheltered.
Can't you see what you're doing?
Easy for you to say. You can live how you want. We need the jobs.
But Platenteena doesn't view the world from anything other than her own worldview. Earth's pollution is the source of the problem. That's it. The same way Batman sees the solution for ending crime is dressing up in a bulletproof Halloween costume and beating up villains. The same way Mr. Incredible sees saving a suicidal man is the right choice. But what he is doing is taking away his choice. Therefore, even though writers dress up our heroes as underdogs with the correct ideas and villains as dictators who will lead to the destruction of the world, more often than not, our heroes end up looking a lot more like villains than heroes when observed outside of the context that the writers put them in.